My wife said she would go alone to the after-party at her boss's house after the company party, but my response was short, definitive, a cold blade cutting what little remained between us. So enjoy it while it lasts, because you won't have a home to return to. I turned my back and walked away without looking back. I knew. I always knew. It wasn't just the party, it wasn't just her insistence on going alone, it wasn't just the provocative dress she chose after telling me she didn't even need my company that day. It was the silence. The kind of silence that only exists between two people who, deep down, have already lost each other. She didn't answer anything. She stood there, holding her purse in one hand and her cell phone in the other, while I left behind more than a wedding. I left behind everything I had built alongside someone who no longer saw me as a priority. The next day, she called me in tears. She cried as if the ground had been pulled out from under her, as if regret had crashed down on her shoulders with the weight of a world she herself had destroyed. Her voice trembled, her words tumbled over each other. Please, listen to me, it wasn't how it seems. I made a mistake, just one mistake, but nothing she said made a difference. Not at that time. Because the decision had already been made. It wasn't an impulse. It was the result of silent nights, dinners in silence, empty stares, laughter that became a memory. And, above all, it was the consequence of choices. Her choices. Because in the end, it all comes down to this: every choice has a price. And she had chosen. As much as it hurt, and it did hurt, I moved on calmly. Every step I took away from her was a reminder of how much I diminished myself in that relationship. And even without knowing it, in the midst of the silent reconstruction of myself, I ended up finding someone. Someone who listened to me without me needing to shout. Who chose me every day without me needing to beg for attention. It was a love without effort, without tension, without zones of doubt. A serene love, like a house where all the doors are open and none are secretly locked. She knew my past. She knew the pain. And yet she chose to walk with me. Meanwhile, the woman who once swore to love me was being swallowed by the emptiness of her own decisions. Alone. Her boss, the same one she thought could offer her more than I could, never committed to anything. Never promised anything. It was just another invitation, another party, another night. After that, silence. Disdain. Disappearance. And then she began to understand. She began to see clearly everything she had thrown away. But time waits for no one. I remember the first time I saw her again. Months later. She was downcast, thinner, but what shocked me most was her gaze. The gaze of someone still trying to understand how she had lost everything. She tried to smile. I just nodded and kept walking. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. But in that instant, she understood, there was no going back. The strangest thing is that she started to appear. Not directly. But she was there. In the places we loved. In the cafes where we spent our Saturday mornings. In the park where we walked hand in hand. She sat on the bench where we first kissed. Alone. Always alone. Sometimes with a book in her lap, sometimes just staring into nothingness. It was as if he were searching for something. Perhaps memories. Perhaps ghosts. Perhaps forgiveness. But I wasn't there anymore. And I never would be again. She never tried to get closer. But he never stopped going either. It was as if she needed to relive every memory to understand everything she had lost. As if every corner of that city was now a mirror of what she destroyed with a single decision. One day, as I was leaving one of those places with my new partner, I noticed she was watching us from afar. Not with anger. Not with envy. With pain. A quiet, resigned pain, desperate inside, but serene on the outside. It was as if she had finally understood the difference between real love and a fleeting illusion. She looked at us as one looks at a life that could have been hers, but now belongs to someone else. And at that moment, she cried. Not those dramatic tears, not theatrical sobs. She cried softly, like someone who understands that certain pains are not shouted, only felt. There was one day in particular that marked me. I was alone, having coffee before a meeting, and she walked in. We looked at each other. She hesitated, but approached. She sat in the chair opposite me without saying anything for a few seconds. Then she spoke, her voice choked with emotion, trying to maintain what little dignity she had left. "I know you hate me. I know there's no going back. But I just wanted you to know that. I still love you." I took a deep breath. Not out of anger, but out of respect for our shared history. And I replied, "You only realized you loved me after you lost me." She lowered her eyes. And in that instant, even without screams, without scandals, without public humiliation, she broke inside. Because she understood. Because, finally, she accepted. But what she never knew, and what she may never know, is what I did that last night, after I turned my back. What I found. Who I found. Because sometimes, life takes us to the bottom only to show us who awaits us when we resurface. And me? I not only found someone better. I found myself. And I would never go back. Now, the curious thing about all this, and perhaps the most ironic part, is that she still goes to the same places. Still sits on the same benches. Still orders the same coffee. Still walks down the same corridors, as if at any moment I might appear. But I don't appear. I will never appear again. And what she saw that last day in the park, well, that changed everything. Because that day, she didn't just see my absence. She saw something more. Something that made it clear that, between regret and forgiveness, there is always a line that, once crossed, can never be undone. And when she crossed that line, she didn't realize that the love of her life had just crossed the line in the opposite direction, onto a path she could never follow. Now the remaining question is, what exactly did she see that day? And why, upon seeing it, did she simply get up, and never return to the park? This is the part of the story that nobody knows yet. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal isn't romanticized, it's exposed. All stories are fictional, but the feelings are real. Our goal is clear, to show, unfiltered, how betrayal destroys homes, hearts, and futures. Each narrative is a reminder that choices have consequences. Prepare yourself. What you are about to hear is a powerful, moving, and shocking story. A lesson you will never forget. There they were. Noah and Emily. A couple who, at first glance, seemed to have defied the odds. They met at the end of college, on one of those days that didn't seem to hold anything special, but ended up leaving a lasting mark. He, calm, introspective, one of those men who observe first before speaking. She, expansive, with an energy that seemed to fill the spaces she passed through. The kind of woman who smiled at waiters, struck up conversations in the elevator, and remembered everyone's name in the building. While Noah preferred the comfort of predictability, Emily was drawn to the unpredictability of life. Perhaps that's what united them, the contrast. The balance between the static and the moving, between the anchor and the wind. They started slowly, as if feeling their way through the ground before building anything. First came the after-school coffees, the long conversations about nothing and everything. Then came the lazy Sundays, the stay a little longer, the late-night messages that became sorely missed when they didn't arrive. Noah was never a man of many theatrical gestures, but Emily saw affection in the details, the way he draped his coat over her shoulders when it got cold, or how he knew exactly how much sugar she liked in her coffee. And Noah, though more reserved, felt safe with her, as if he could finally be himself without needing to perform a socially acceptable version of himself. Over time, their courtship turned into engagement, engagement into marriage, and life followed its natural course. They bought a modest but charming house in a quiet neighborhood, with neighbors who greeted each other in the morning and children playing on the sidewalk. They decorated each room carefully, his more minimalist, hers more inclined towards color and improvisation. The living room always had a blanket folded on the sofa, a lamp with a yellowish light, and a painting they had bought together on a short trip to Vermont. It was the place where they watched movies cuddled up and where, on Sundays, he read the newspaper while she made pancakes. It wasn't a life of great luxuries, but it was a life with meaning, with routine, with bonds. Emily started working at an events company and quickly stood out. She had charisma, presence, and a very unique way of dealing with people, always making everyone feel special. She rose quickly, was promoted in a short time, gained responsibilities, and began attending dinners, conferences, and corporate parties. Noah was always her biggest supporter. He believed in her talent, admired her ability to excel, and was proud of each new achievement. Sometimes, he felt small in the face of everything she represented to others, but he never let that feeling show. His love was silent, but solid. The kind that doesn't need to be said every day to be felt. Lately, Emily's life had become more hectic. Trips became more frequent, schedules tighter, and commitments increasingly non-negotiable. Dinners cancelled at the last minute, birthdays she could barely attend, messages that took hours to be answered. Noah understood, to a certain extent. He knew that professional growth came with sacrifices, and he tried to convince himself that this intense phase would pass. But something was different. Something he couldn't clearly explain, but felt in the air. Perhaps it was the way she looked away when he asked if she would be late, or the rush to shower as soon as she got home, as if she needed to cleanse not only her body but also some part of her conscience. Despite this, he continued to believe that it was all part of the journey. That marriages go through phases, turbulence, imbalances. And that true love doesn't crumble at the first sign of instability. He maintained his habits. He woke up before her, made coffee, left a handwritten message on the counter, small phrases like, "Good morning, love," "Good luck at the meeting," or just a drawn heart. She often didn't even notice. She would rush through the kitchen, take a quick sip of the almost cold coffee, and leave in a hurry, with her cell phone to her ear. Even so, he didn't stop. Because for him, love was more than immediate reciprocity. It was patience. It was believing. There were moments when they still connected. A laugh during a movie, a knowing glance at the dinner table, a tighter hug after a difficult day. But these moments were becoming increasingly rare. She seemed more and more distant, and he, more and more alone, even sleeping next to the woman who swore he would be there forever. There were nights when he would wake up and reach out, only to remember that she hadn't returned yet. He would text, ask if everything was all right, and receive vague answers, like, "Yes, we're just finishing a project here," or, "Just a few more minutes." And, however much something inside him screamed, he remained silent. He preferred to believe. He chose to trust. Because losing faith in the other was, for him, the first step towards the end. And he wasn't ready for that yet. Emily, on the other hand, seemed to live on a different frequency. Always busy, always with something more important to do, always surrounded by people, but, deep down, perhaps more alone than she had ever been. There was something in her eyes that seemed tired. As if the life she had built demanded more than she had to give. But she didn't say it. She kept it all inside, as if admitting tiredness was weakness. Or perhaps fear. Fear of facing the choices she had been making, fear of looking in the mirror and not recognizing herself. Still, she continued. She maintained her pose, her smiles, her neat clothes, her red lipstick, her armor against the fragility that hid behind the strong and successful image. Weekends became increasingly quiet. He would suggest outings, walks, short trips, and she always had an excuse. "I need to rest, I'm swamped with reports, my boss asked for an urgent presentation." Sometimes, he would go out alone. He would walk around the neighborhood, sit in cafes, watch couples laughing and sharing desserts. It wasn't envy. It was longing. Longing for something that was technically still there, but that, in practice, was already slipping away like sand through his fingers. He tried to revive what he felt, tried to rekindle something that seemed dormant. He prepared dinners, bought flowers, made simple surprises. She smiled, thanked him, but it was a perfunctory smile, the smile of someone present out of obligation, not out of desire. And he knew it. He always knew. He just didn't want to accept it. The straw that broke the camel's back, though not yet identified as such, began to take shape on a particular night. Her company was organizing a large event, followed by a get-together at the home of one of the directors. She casually mentioned that everyone would be going. He asked if he needed to join her. She replied with a brief, almost automatic laugh, "No, honey, it's work, everyone's going with the team, you'll be bored." He didn't insist. He simply looked into her eyes and nodded. And in that look, something was said. Something without words. Because there are silences that speak much louder than any dialogue. And in that silence, the most difficult pain of all was born, the realization that love is no longer in the same place where it was left. The next morning, everything continued as normal. Or at least, it seemed so. She acted as if nothing had changed, as if nothing was out of place. And he, with his soul in ruins, pretended to believe it. But inside, he was already beginning to build walls where before there had only been bridges. Because, however much I loved, however much I tried, there was a limit. And he could already hear, in the distance, the echo of something slowly breaking apart. But no one yet knew what was to come. No one imagined how that night would mark the beginning of a spiral of losses, hidden truths, irreversible choices, and pains that would never be forgotten. Everything was still calm. Everything was still in order. But, as in every emotional earthquake, the destruction begins before the first tremor. And what would happen after that, would change everything. That morning, with a clear sky and fresh air, Noah got up early as usual, but there was no rush to make coffee or write the little notes he used to leave on the bleachers. The habit, once automatic and full of affection, now only reminded him how much he no longer belonged to that routine. The house was silent, but it wasn't the comfortable silence of when two bodies rest in harmony, it was a concrete emptiness, the kind of silence that weighs on the shoulders and corrodes from the edges. He dressed slowly, put on his shoes with a slowness known only to those who carry well-guarded grudges, and left without saying a single word. There was nothing more to be said. Not after the previous night. Emily arrived around 3 in the morning, her heels in hand, her eyes blurred by makeup and exhaustion, but there was no one else to notice. The porch light was off. The door, as always, was unlocked. She went in, walked to the bedroom, saw the empty space beside the bed, and knew something had changed. It wasn't a guess, it was a brutal certainty that pierced her chest without asking permission. For the first time in years, she didn't have the strength to take off her clothes or wash her face. She just lay on her side, looking at his pillow, still marked, still smelling, and cried silently until sleep overcame her. When she woke up, he was already gone. In the days that followed, time took on a different quality. Everything seemed slower, harder to bear. Emily tried to move on with her life as if nothing had happened, as if the party, the glances, the touches, and the choices made that night could be erased with apologies or silences. But there was something in her that she could no longer disguise. The lightness she had previously used as a shield now gave way to a rigidity in her gaze, a fragility that manifested itself in the details, the trembling hand holding the cup, the constant lump in her throat, the regret in the form of chronic fatigue. She called Noah the next day, and the next, and again the day after, until he answered. His voice was firm, but cold. She begged him to talk, to listen to her in person, not to end something so big over a mistake. He didn't respond with anger, nor with harsh words. He simply said that if she needed closure, she could meet him at the cafe where they usually met on Sundays. One last conversation. And that was all. Emily arrived early. She was wearing a light blue blouse, his favorite, and her hair was loose, just as he always said he liked it. She tried to put on perfume, but the scent made her nauseous. Her hands were sweating, her heart pounding in her chest. When she saw him crossing the street, her eyes welled up. He walked with calm steps, but with an unyielding expression. He sat down in front of her without smiling, without touching her hand. She spoke first, stumbling over her words, saying she didn't know what she was doing, that everything had happened so fast, that it wasn't as it seemed. But he interrupted, with the calm of someone who didn't want to prolong the suffering any longer. He said she didn't need to explain. He already knew. He always knew. Not because of gestures, nor messages, nor the mismatched schedules. But because, deep down, love teaches you to perceive absences before they become abandonment. She cried. She begged forgiveness like someone begging for air. She said it was a mistake, a slip-up, that he was the only one who truly mattered. But he looked into her eyes with a firmness that hurt more than screams. And then, in a low, almost weak voice, she whispered that she wanted to fix things, that she could try to rebuild everything. And that's when Noah took a deep breath and said that it wasn't her who needed to fix something, it was him who had already started over. Her eyes widened. He asked if there was someone else. He hesitated for a second, but answered honestly. Yes, there was. Someone who didn't need to lie to be with him, who didn't make him feel like a stranger in his own home. She tried to hide the shock, but her face betrayed the turmoil. Still, she insisted. She wanted to know if he still loved her. Noah looked away, glanced at the street, at the couple walking hand in hand, and replied that the love was still there, but in the form of mourning. It was no longer hope, it was memory. The days passed like shadows. Emily began to mentally relive every detail that had led up to that point. She tried to find a moment, an exact point where things went wrong, where she could have done things differently. But the cruel truth is that she knew from the first step she took she was going in the opposite direction. She just didn't think he would really leave. Because she never imagined that his love would end. And that's what destroyed her. From then on, she started going to the same places as before. The cafe where they used to laugh together, the bookstore where he picked up the books she pretended to like just to please him, the park where he twirled her in his arms as if time didn't exist. Always at the same time, on the same days. Like someone returning to an abandoned house hoping that one day someone will appear at the door. But Noah didn't appear. Because now he walked in other parks, laughed with a different voice beside her, read books without needing to pretend. Emily sat on the same bench where they once felt eternal, but now the bench was cold, and the wind seemed to whisper what she already knew, there is no return after destroying what one swore to protect. One morning, as she turned the corner of the park, Emily stopped suddenly. Her eyes froze when she saw Noah. He was there. But he wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him, and in her lap, with her arms wrapped around her father's neck, a child laughed loudly, her eyes shining. Emily took 2 steps back, as if the ground had shifted. She watched from afar as Noah crouched down to tie the little girl's shoelace and kissed her forehead tenderly. Then she stood up, took her companion's hand, and the 3 of them walked side by side in opposite directions. She couldn't move. She could only feel. A weight on her chest, a silent pain, a guilt so intense it couldn't be explained, it could only be carried. That was the future that could have been hers. That was the laughter that perhaps had sprung from within her. That was the story she herself had torn up before finishing writing it. She didn't cry at that moment. She simply turned and walked slowly to the bench where they had sat so many times. She sat down, ran her hands over the wooden seat as if touching a distant past, closed her eyes, and allowed herself to wallow in regret. She remembered the last time they were there together, the unspoken words, the implicit promises she had broken without realizing she wouldn't have a chance to undo them. And then, for the first time, she didn't wait for him. She stood up and, without looking back, left the park. That day, she didn't take her cell phone, didn't answer emails, didn't go to work. That day, she simply accepted it. She accepted that she had crossed a line from which there is no return, and that certain people, no matter how much we love them, simply move on, with different eyes, different embraces, different stories. In the last message Noah sent, days later, he wrote only one sentence. A single line that, to her, sounded like a final goodbye: "I forgave you, but what we had no longer exists." And it was at that moment that she crumbled. Not because she hadn't been forgiven, but because she finally understood that forgiveness is not synonymous with return. Sometimes, forgiveness is just a door that closes respectfully, but without return. And the love she thought would always be there, waiting for another chance, now belonged to another story, a story where she would never again be a character. Months passed. The seasons changed without asking permission, the leaves fell, the branches dried, then came the gentler winds and, finally, the first signs of spring. The city continued its course, indifferent to the inner pain of those who walked through it. But for Noah and Emily, time had no such effect. It didn't erase anything. It didn't soften. It didn't reverse. It only solidified the choices, hardened the consequences, and shaped their destinies based on what was done, and what was left undone, at that definitive breaking point. It was as if, from that night on, each had been pushed to opposite sides of a path that could no longer cross. And even if one day they tried to meet again, they would be completely different versions of who they once promised each other. Noah now lived lightly. It wasn't an exaggerated happiness, nor a cinematic romance, but there was peace. A peace he never knew how much he needed until he experienced it. He shared his days with someone who not only chose him but respected him, who didn't play games, who told him where she was, who she was with, without him needing to ask. The trust between them wasn't negotiated, it was natural. On weekends, they strolled through the park where, long ago, he lived old memories. Now, that place had new meanings. He still sat on the wooden bench, but no longer as someone waiting for the past. He sat as someone living the present moment fully. The child running ahead of him, with unrestrained laughter and small hands holding flowers, was a reflection of what he believed he had lost forever, the ability to start over. And the woman beside him, complicit and silent, was proof that true love doesn't require superhuman effort to exist. He hadn't forgotten Emily. He hadn't erased the pain. He simply didn't let her define who he was anymore. Emily, on the other hand, followed a different path. A harder, lonelier path, where each step echoed her own choices. In the following months, she tried to find herself again. She immersed herself in work, filling her schedule with meetings, trips, social engagements, as if occupying her time could also fill the void. But it was no use. Because there were moments when the world around her fell silent, and all that remained was her, alone, with the sound of her own conscience. At night, she would lie in a cold bed, in an apartment that was too modern, too quiet, and try to convince herself that what she had done was just a mistake, that it could have happened to anyone. But this attempt was always interrupted by memories that insisted on returning: the breakfast with notes, the spontaneous hugs in the middle of the hallway, the Sundays of movies and blankets. Small memories, but together they formed what she missed most, the feeling of being loved completely. She tried to meet other people. A few dates, a few exchanged messages, a few attempts to relive what they once had. But there was no reciprocity. There were comparisons, projections, frustration. No one was like him. No one looked like him. No one touched like him. And the worst part, she knew she would never be touched that way again, because no one loved like he loved. In the company hallways, colleagues spoke of his new phase with admiration. Once, she overheard one of the secretaries commenting on how happy he was, how sweet his new partner was, how charming their son was. Emily pretended not to hear, but her throat tightened and she had to lock herself in the bathroom to cry alone. What hurt her most wasn't knowing he had moved on, but understanding that she was no longer part of his world. She was the past. She was the woman he forgave, but didn't want back. And that silently tore her apart. One morning, upon opening the mailbox she rarely used, she found an envelope with no return address. Inside, there was only a printed photograph. Noah, smiling, with the child in his lap and the woman beside him, in a flowery garden. No caption. No message. Just the image. A photograph that said more than any text. She knew instantly who had left it. Perhaps someone from the company, perhaps a mutual friend, perhaps fate itself deciding that she needed to see with her own eyes what she had lost. She held the photo for minutes, motionless, and then put it away inside a book, like someone who can't destroy it, but also can't look at it again. In the following months, she stopped frequenting her old haunts. She stopped going to the park, never returned to the coffee shop, and avoided any route that might remind her of what had been. She started therapy. I was trying, with real effort, to understand why she had destroyed the only love that was truly worthwhile. Sometimes, she even hated herself. At other times, she tried to forgive herself. But self-forgiveness is harder when you know you hurt someone who only loved you. Time didn't bring peace. It brought acceptance. And with it, a kind of pain that was more serene, but no less cruel, the pain of living with what could have been. Years later, at a literary fair she was visiting alone, she saw a child running between the stands and tripping on the carpet. She knelt down to help, and when she looked up, she saw Noah a few meters away, holding a book. He saw her. He approached. The two stood face to face for a moment that seemed to suspend time. He smiled, a gentle, almost sad smile. She, with full eyes, asked how he was. He replied that he was fine. She looked at the boy, then at him, and said, "He has your eyes." Noah nodded. She wanted to say more, but she knew there was no space. Not there, not anymore. So, she simply said, "I'm glad you found what you deserve." And he replied with a simple, "I hope you find it too." And then, for the last time, they turned and went their separate ways. A reunion without resentment, without promises, without a future. Just the closure that life delivers when there is nothing left to resolve. This is a story that doesn't end with reconciliation, but with consequences. A story that shows that love can be strong, but even it has a breaking point. That forgiveness doesn't mean return. That certain choices, however impulsive, leave permanent marks. And, above all, that betraying someone who loves you is like breaking a precious mirror. Even if you try to glue it back together, the cracks will remain, reflecting what was destroyed. If this story touched you, if it made you reflect, leave your comment. We want to know your opinion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow stories that show the real and emotional side of human choices. Here, we do not support any kind of betrayal. Each story is fictional, but the feelings are real. And the message is too: betrayal is not just any mistake, it's a decision that can cost everything. Reflect on this. True love doesn't demand perfection, only respect. And when respect is broken, sometimes no love can withstand it.